Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for making time to join us again, following up from our presentation this morning from the National Skills Commission office. We've still got a few people just dialing in at the moment, but we have put the session on record, so you can turn automatically your microphone and your camera are turned off. We'll have time at the end for questions where you can turn your microphones on. You also can raise your hand or add questions through the chat process along the way if you want to, so we can pick them up at the end of the presentation. So with us today, we've got Lisa Buckingham. Lisa's the CEO of Jobs Victoria. Lisa's been in the role now for about 12 months, I think, Lisa. And she's been a great support of the association and some of the programs we've run, like the Victorian Apprenticeship Recovery Program. You would have seen last week we reached our 300th milestone in that program. So a lot of that work is due to Lisa's hard work behind the scenes. So Lisa's going to give you an update on a few of the programs that the Jobs Victoria team are working on over the next 12 months. With that, I'd also just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today. I acknowledge that people are meeting from different parts of around Australia, but I want to recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and community, and pay my respects to their elders and cultures past, present and emerging. Thanks, Lisa. We'll turn your microphone on and we'll hand over to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Gary, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Buckingham, and it's my absolute pleasure to be with you here today. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm beaming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I have about an hour with you today, and I'm very conscious that these virtual presentations can sometimes be challenging for the best of us, and I often find myself sort of staring at the screen and missing people's faces and that interaction. My aim here is to quickly run you through some slides which should hopefully spark a few questions and some conversation, and then hopefully we can remove those from the screen and perhaps have a good Q&A session that we can talk to each other's faces more than slides. So if you can bear with me for about 15 minutes and then we'll quickly go to Q&A. I think that's the best way, but obviously if you've got a question during the presentation, I'm really happy to take questions. So pop your hand up or shove something in the chat, and I should be able to multitask and talk my way through the slides. Thanks, Felix. So Jobs Victoria, many of you would know that Jobs Victoria has existed in one form or another since 2016, when it was really pulled together from more than 30 employment programs that existed across the state government into a consolidated area in what was the Department of Digita, another difficult acronym, but was really about consolidating the state government's expertise and funding into one area that could support people looking for work. Jobs Victoria managed multiple programs over the past 5 years, and through its very successful Jobs Victoria Employment Network, put about, and is continuing to do so, about 15,000 people into work. Because of the pandemic and the impacts that this had on the labour market, and had a disproportionate impact on many of the people who the state wants to support and ensure that they don't fall further behind, the state government invested a record $620 million into employment support services in the November budget last year, and thus emerged a new Jobs Victoria that had a much bigger remit and a trebling of funding to support more people into work, and importantly, a very clear mandate to connect employers with staff that they may need in their local area. This is a bit wonky and conceptual, this slide, but I show it because I think it's important to let you know that there is a lot of design thinking and systems thinking that has gone into the expanded Jobs Victoria. And what we've really tried to do here is design an integrated system that can support people wherever they live, whatever their needs, and all their levels of job readiness, and understanding and appreciating that everyone's path to employment is different and unique. How do you build and design a system that is personalised, that takes into account people's unique circumstances, is one that is voluntary, doesn't have mutual obligation requirements, and one that engages employers through the system as well, so that they are part of the success of placing people into work and work that sticks. We have designed a system that from the beginning, from the points of access and navigation, there is now a new online support system. We've got a dedicated hotline, and perhaps in contrast to the Commonwealth, we have developed and moved more services to face-to-face rather than digitised services. And we have established a new workforce of over 600 people to do that. And at the same time, through other incentives, we have established the Jobs Victoria Fund, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is a $250 million wage subsidy fund. But together with the social procurement framework, the major project skills guarantee, all of the other supports and investments that government's making, we've tried to create an integrated support system for people looking for work, and making sure that we're not replicating what the Commonwealth is doing, rather trying to complement the Commonwealth support system, but at the same time being a compassionate and personalised employment support system. As I mentioned, record investment, and at the heart of this is 266 million that is directly funding services, employment support services, and a new workforce of over 600 people. Many of you are probably familiar with our new advocate workforce. We're rolling those out. There's probably around 80 people out on the streets, although during the last lockdown we had to bring them all back in, but we've got around 80 people, and by the end of the month we'll have most of those out in our community. Advocates are really the new face of Jobs Victoria, and they are meant to be part of communities and accessible for everyone who wants to talk to someone about how they can find the right advice, information and support for them, or perhaps their family members or someone they know. This is a new workforce that we're standing up, and so what comes with that is all the systems and supports that need to be in place behind it. But I think we're going really well. We've got over 40 host organisations spread right across Victoria, and this is really something that we are focusing a lot of our efforts on, to ensure that if people can't get through on a telephone hotline, or if the internet isn't something that is right for them, that there is an opportunity to meet with someone and talk to them about how they can get support and advice and referrals to our Jobs Victoria partners. In the next couple of weeks, we will finalise and announce our new partners in our Jobs Victoria employment services. This will be the biggest part of what we do. So this is an evolution of the Jobs Victoria program, the JVEN program, and we will be supporting thousands of people over the coming 2 years, with probably more than 50 providers across the state who will be providing core employment support services, and also more specialised. So being able to respond to particular communities' needs and aspirations, and also being able to respond to particular dynamics in local communities. We're also just finalising our selection process for careers counsellors. We were funded to establish a statewide process and statewide program, for careers counsellors. We are working through what that looks like, but we will be hoping to offer counselling services via phone, in person, and it's a really exciting thing for this to be part of the Jobs Victoria suite of services. Careers counselling is often thought about as something that perhaps is slightly more middle class, in that it costs money to go to, and it's not necessarily something that the state has offered as a service. So I think in terms of helping people think about career transitions, people who may be work ready but are looking to change industry or think about a new career path, particularly supporting people who may have been retrenched. This is a new service that we're hoping will be able to provide that type of support to people who are work ready but are perhaps looking for more advice or different entries into new careers. So that's just the list there in words of what I've basically spoken about. The one thing I'll draw your attention to is we also receive funding for the continuation of our youth employment scheme. So this is a program that's been running for years and years. It's put many people through the public sector. It's very successful. We're looking at, I guess, re-energising that and thinking about what the next few years looks like as we focus on supporting young people through a fairly bumpy time in our economy. And then just to reiterate our new access and navigation services, which are at the bottom of the screen there. I mentioned our employment services, and this is really at the heart of what we do at Jobs Victoria, and that is a personalised approach to helping people get ready for work and help find the work that suits them, and an employer who is ready and willing to support a Jobs Victoria client. One of the things that we looked at when selecting our new JVES providers was their connections and linkages in with employers. This is a really important part of our model, and how we work is to understand the needs of employers and ensuring that there are the right sort of workplace conditions and environment for people to thrive, and for those 26-week outcomes to stick. We think this is really what differentiates JVES to perhaps, say, other employment programs that the Commonwealth may run, but also a much more personalised approach, which is at the heart of our model, which is empowering Jobs Victoria partners to take the lead and to design the programs that they think work well for them in partnership with us. So this is a flagship program for government, and we'll be making some announcements about those successful providers in the next couple of weeks. Really quickly, I'll talk about the online hub, because it's an evolution of our Working for Victoria Sidekicker platform, which some of you may be familiar with. We set that up in record time, and that really allowed us to place over 13,500 people during the pandemic into Working for Victoria jobs. But what it also did is it created a capability that government had not seen before, about how you can offer good recruitment support services to employers to help them find the candidates that may need. Ironically, during the pandemic, we started to hear from many employers that they couldn't find the right people, that they couldn't find people with the skills and experience that they wanted in their local area. What our new online hub does, and there's more than 110,000 people who are registered on our online hub, is show that there are people out there and available. We can match people down to very specific local levels, and we can also help employers to find the candidates that they need. If you take this further, you could think about the opportunities for employers to identify social procurement and inclusive employment candidates. So, for example, we can, through our platform, identify people with a disability or people who may be long-term unemployed, and we can also find people in local areas with specific skills and backgrounds that can help employers think about the workforce that they want to build. That little case study there, Just Gold, is a social enterprise, a communications agency, and they look to hire people who have autism or support people who have some psychosocial conditions and need support in the workplace. Through working for Victoria and through our recruitment team, they were able to hire 3 people off the platform that fitted their agency objectives and the vision that they had to support people into really good work. And it's a great story of how employers can come to us and say, we're really hoping that you can support us on our inclusive employment journey. Can you help get us in contact with good candidates who would want to come and work with us? And I've got plenty of other stories like that, but the Just Gold one is a really nice example of a social enterprise that are doing things a little differently and that Jobs Victoria is trying to support. The Jobs Victoria Fund is a $250 million wage subsidy fund, and it is attempting to get at least 10,000 people into work over the next 10 years. There's eligibility criteria that I won't go into because it gets pretty specific, but ultimately, if you hire a woman over 45, an Aboriginal person, or someone with a disability, or anyone else who we consider a priority job seeker, the employer is eligible to receive $20,000 to create that secure employment for that person for 12 months. We're seeing really good take up of women, and you'll see there that government has set us a objective of filling at least 60% of those 10,000 roles with women, and another 50 million of those to be filled by women over 45. You'll all be very familiar with that fact that people throw out, that women were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. That is absolutely true. And we're also seeing that whilst unemployment numbers are steadying, we are seeing women over 45 still not rebounding as quickly as we'd hoped. 25% of jobs in Australia are still casual, and we're also seeing insecure work not bouncing back like we thought we would. And we're also seeing long-term unemployment rates being the worst in Victoria in 26 years. So whilst we talk about a strengthening economy, and many politicians talk about our very successful rebound from the pandemic, and that is true, I think our job at Jobs Victoria is to ensure that those people who were impacted by the pandemic and even before that faced barriers to work are supported through the next couple of years and aren't left behind in the opportunities that government is, both federal and state governments are doing through a lot of the nation building tasks, a lot of construction, and a lot of stimulus in other areas as well. That's it from me, which is almost perfectly on 15 minutes. And I don't normally keep to time, so that's really good, Gary. I'm happy to open it up if you'd like to open the floor up to questions, and really keen to hear from people on the line about any interactions they've had with Jobs Victoria or any things that they're seeing in their work about how Jobs Victoria could work with their organisations. I'm really keen to open up the floor and hear from people.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. Again, people, I'll just set this so people can join, allow the mic. Sorry, should have done that for everyone. Do it from up here. Okay, so everyone's mic is enabled. It automatically defaults to being muted, but you can turn it on and ask a question or raise your hand. I had a couple of questions for you, Lisa, just to get things rolling. The Youth Employment Scheme program, so that's been a long-term initiative in previous years. It's good to see that it's something you're thinking of continuing in the future. Again, with my group training hat on, we'd be really keen to work with you on that. In the past, GTOs have had a really strong relationship with local government agencies and been able to provide some really good outcomes. I guess it's sort of been similar to our VARP program that we're running with you at the moment. So is that looking at starting from sort of 1st of July for the next financial year, is it?
The funding kicks in from the 1st of July, but we've probably got a tail end from previous years, and just in terms of capacity, we're really looking to stand up the Jobs Victoria Employment Service and Careers Counsellors first, but at the same time, yes, just keeps rolling through.
Yeah.
But I think the opportunity with this additional funding, there's a youth strategy that government is working on internally and we'll start to talk about. So I think there's an opportunity to look at yes and see, you know, if we're really getting the most out of it, if it's really working well for partners. And I'd be really keen to explore with the AEN and other people on the call about getting the most out of that investment in the years to come with the youth employment scheme, and what we can do to really strengthen you know, its position as a really good stepping stone for people. You know, how do we use all the money that is in the system at the moment to make the most out of the opportunity that we have? And I think there's some tweaks that we can make there. So I'd be really keen to talk to you about that.
Yeah. And again, I know we've had a number of conversations already, but there's a few opportunities there where I think some of the Commonwealth programs are leaving some potential cohorts behind. So one is obviously the boost in apprenticeship commencements, which is a really attractive wage subsidy from a Commonwealth level, but it's not eligible for local government authorities. So again, there's an opportunity there to do more in that space.
Yes.
And then the other one that we spoke about was how do we support mature age people getting into an apprenticeship as well, because there's certainly some wage barriers there. And you know, the Commonwealth wage subsidies are going to stop in March next year, which seems like a long way away, but that'll be the tail end of the traditional recruitment period for people who are leaving school at the end of this year. So how do we pick up and support some of them who aren't eligible to get a job straight away, or the ones that are missing out on that initial recruitment phase?
Yeah. They're really good points, and I think we should absolutely explore the eligibility, but also the gaps as well. I think that's a really good point.
I guess the other thing I just wanted to raise was the latest figures I saw from the Commonwealth Senate Estimates Committee was that they were at about 155,000 sign-ups through the Commonwealth program. They've only got a budget for 270. I would imagine that's going to probably finish before the 30th of March next year, unless they go over budget.
Yeah, I saw those figures too. You wouldn't like to make a guess as to whether or not they'd keep the program open if they went over budget. I think it would depend on, you know, circumstances that are bigger than, you know, what we could make a guess at. But I think if there's a strong uptake, if that strong uptake continues, it's going to finish well before next year.
Yeah, this year's been a lot stronger than we thought. And again, I think apprenticeship numbers overall have looked really good. I think there's a few pockets where certainly in Victoria there's more work could be done. And that's probably a good leading question for the members if they're seeing any particular cohorts in their regions that need some additional support. Maybe we throw that question to them as well. Oh, they're really quiet, Lisa. You've scared them all off.
I know.
Oh. No questions from anyone. Geez, here's your opportunity to put us on the spot. All right, Lisa, with the employment data that you see, is there any specific, I know you talked about mature age women being probably more adversely affected than others in the recent sort of downturn in the economy, and that obviously probably leads on to things like hospitality, retail, tourism sectors.
Yeah.
Is there anything else from your end that you see that is probably more of a need, more support needed?
We're focusing internally on the unemployment rates of young people. We know it's higher across the state, but in particular for Aboriginal young people. And within our group at DJPR is the Aboriginal Employment Development Team, and we work very closely with that team and the new Victorian Aboriginal Economic and Employment Council. And government is very committed to seeing what we can do to change those terrible statistics. And that goes to how we're thinking about the design and delivery of Jobs Victoria services. So we are about to commence a consultation process with Aboriginal communities about what specific Aboriginal employment support services could look like. And we've also just run a statewide roundtable series about some of the issues and considerations from Aboriginal communities and groups about what the state could do and how we could work in partnership, more importantly, to change some of these statistics around. I would say that's probably one of our highest priorities, as well as older women and ensuring that those who have left the workforce over the last year, because we know many people just dropped out, are considering coming back. And also, as we know, many of those unemployment rates mask insecure work and the underemployment that we know exists, particularly for women, but also in those specific industries that you've spoken about that also happen to be the ones that were hardest hit by COVID. So you've sort of got multiple challenges piling up on each other for particular cohorts in particular sectors, in particular places. And that plays out with the job active data that we have access to as a state. The Commonwealth shares that with us on a monthly basis, but we also look at other wellbeing measures and other measures. Obvious ones, but financial wellbeing and stability, family violence rates, child protection rates. We look at those carefully across government, and you start to see patterns where we know that at the heart of that is worklessness in families and intergenerational disadvantage that plays itself out in many of the things that we all work on. But I think in terms of the supports that government knows some families need, employment is well and truly part of government's response to that now. So as the employment part of government, we are now at the table on many different committees around economic recovery, about community wellbeing. And within my area as well, we have a place-based team, and we are looking at and we fund many community revitalisation projects. So I guess in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that we don't think about employment as one thing and other things that are going on in people's families. We're really trying to take a much broader approach around what does an inclusive Victoria look like, and what are all the different facets of inclusion, and how does government with partners with community make that a reality in a difficult time, but in a time when actually government doesn't have the answers. But we all need to be working on these things together. And post-pandemic, or we're still arguably in it, I think has opened up that conversation for many people to be saying, well, what actually do we all need to do here, and what is the thing that we need to be working on together to change some of those stats I spoke about in the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lisa. I think Daniel Dixon had his hand up before. I'm not sure. There we go. Daniel, the floor is yours.
I did, Gary, but you stole my question.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm good, Lisa. How are you?
Yeah, good.
Good, good. My question's around, I suppose, how much of, the services that are going to be provided by JobsVic and I suppose the wider DJPR into regional communities, other than just metro.
Yeah, so our whole model and that whole system I showed you before is a statewide model, and we have a lot of funding going into regional Victoria proportionate to population and need. So that 266 million that I spoke about has been distributed across the state by region based on a number of factors that I spoke about before. So population size, unemployment rates, and other factors such as numbers of refugees or migrants, Aboriginal population size. So we used a fairly analytical approach to the distribution of funding. And that funding covers off all the advocates, JVES, careers counsellors and other ways. But on top of that, I think I mentioned before, there's lots of other government funding going in through place-based approaches, through community revitalisation and through specific multicultural and Aboriginal initiatives. So I think, you know, the money's sort of piling on program on program on program. One of the challenges I think we have is to keep a really clear focus on what the strategic objectives are when you've got multiple programs all playing out in place, particularly in regional Victoria. But from my perspective, we've got a fair chunk, in fact, a very decent size of our funding and efforts going into regional Victoria. That will wind up as we roll out the programs from the 1st of July. And we're setting up a new regional model where we will actually have people out in regional Victoria for the first time, Jobs Victoria staff out in regional Victoria to start to navigate and bring partners and stakeholders together in a more active conversation about what does service delivery look like in those places.
Awesome.
Thanks, Daniel. I guess that led into my last question for you, Lisa. If members have got particular ideas and programs that they might like to get off the ground, I know there's some guidelines on your website, but is there a particular way that they should get in contact with the department to sort of, I guess, help sort of flesh out some of those conversations a little bit further?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, you know, just make contact with us and let's start the conversation. Guidelines are really important, but at the end of the day, they're just guidelines. Like we're in a wonderful position that we're at the beginning of our 2.5 years of funding. So we're sort of, we're creating initiatives and solutions and ideas as we go. And so the best things that we're doing are in complete concert with our partners and with external agencies. We're pulling together a number of initiatives through our Jobs Victoria Innovation Fund. So that really allows people to approach us and say, hey, we've got a great idea. We think we could get 100 people into the disability sector, or we think we could find 600 jobs in the caring sectors. Do you want to talk with us about how we could do that? So we're looking at initiatives at scale, and we've got funding to be able to negotiate with prospective partners on how we could design employment support programs for people that would work in areas where we know there is demand in the future. So the caring sectors is a good one, transport and logistics, and a lot of the other in-demand sectors that you'll all be familiar with because everyone's looking for people for those sectors. But if people have great ideas, we're really, you know, the open sign is up, and we're really keen to partner with people. I think, Gary, the partnership that we've had with AEN about the recovery package for apprentices was a really great one, and replicating opportunities like that is exactly what we're looking to do over the coming years, and that's what the Jobs Victoria Fund is there to do. So I would encourage anyone to make contact with us. We're really keen to have the conversation.
That's great. Thanks, Lisa. And I know early on we talked about some of the priorities from our perspective. So mature age workers entering into, traditional trades and some of those things. I know you're working with Apprenticeships Victoria on programs that we may be running in the new financial year. So news around some of that stuff will come out shortly, I would have thought.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I see James Montgomery's got his hand up. Over to you, James.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Lisa, for that. I was interested, and you spoke a bit about obviously the sort of the more personalised support system that Jobs Victoria has been putting in place, and conscious is obviously the role that the Commonwealth plays in employment responsibility, and we're trying to get the sort of a better service to local people in the outcome. Are you optimistic in that in the last 12 months that there's been an improvement in that because you've been able to sort of flex around those local needs, but do you think there's learnings that have come from it that will really impact us into the future?
Sorry, James, when you say learnings from who? Sorry.
From both. The relationship between the state and the Commonwealth around getting better local services around, there's clear distinctions around what you're doing and what the Commonwealth has put in place. But are you seeing that it's emerging to a better system post-COVID?
That's a very good question. Because I think, well, we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the Future Employment Services Bill in the Commonwealth. I think it was due to come out of committee last week. I don't know whether the Senate committee have reported on that yet, but I think it's really clear from my perspective, just being someone that reads the newspaper, that the Commonwealth is moving to more digitised support for many people on Job Active. They're obviously refining their systems, but we work in a very different way to the Commonwealth, and that's because we have very different reasons for doing so. Ours is a voluntary system, so that immediately changes the nature of how people engage with us and why people engage with us, because there's no mutual obligations and there's nothing tied to someone getting welfare support by coming to Jobs Victoria. So I think that immediately changes the nature of the dynamic between the job seeker and with the support we provide people. I do think we have a much more intensive service offering and a more personalised one than what is offered to people on Job Seeker, and I think that does change. And I think some of our internal metrics and our evaluation says that we have better outcomes in long-term placements and outcomes than the Commonwealth do. We absolutely have better engagement with employers. I think the last Commonwealth report that came out said it was less than 10% of employers had been actively engaged with. Now, right or wrong, that is a different approach to the model that we've designed, as I spoke about before. So I think we are of the view that we operate as a state government, so we don't have the levers and I guess the ability to enforce things like the Commonwealth do. We're a much smaller state-based program, but because of that, we can do things that the Commonwealth doesn't do. And we've now turned from what was a pretty small-scale employment program over the last 5 years into something where government has asked us to treble the number of people that we're going to put into work in half the time. That means that we have to grow our systems and scale to be able to meet those targets, and that means that we do have to look at how our program now operates, and some of those decisions that we've had to take about personalised service have come to the fore because government has to pay for it. It costs money to have that type of caseload that we have in Jobs Victoria compared to Job Active, which is so much lower in Jobs Victoria.
Yep.
So it's a really hard question for me to answer because it's just that we're very different systems.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think just sometimes we'll see on the ground, you'll see the complexity, how it rolls out and how it impacts, and that system of sort of gaps and overlaps where locally they'll see there's some really great outcomes here, but there's multiple of this one and we're missing things here. So kudos for you for trying to fill some of those gaps. So appreciate that.
It's really hard, and the eligibility question is a difficult one for us as you know, policy makers. Do you support people who are effectively Commonwealth clients in the state? And we've decided, and government decided, that yes, we will. But then there'll be challenges down the path around, I think, DES and what that looks like, and whether the state will play a role in employment support for people with a disability. And so then you open up a whole new range of interventions that the state hasn't gone into before. And so it becomes a question for me, which I always ask my team, is what does this mean for people in our system? What does this mean for a job seeker? We have to keep making it as simple and easy and personalised as possible, and make sure that what you just spoke about, the complexity and, you know, the sometimes doubling up or sometimes gaps, occurs as little as possible.
Yep, appreciate that. Thank you.
And I think that's where the opportunity lies with this network, Lisa. They'll know their local communities better than I do.
Exactly.
And they may see some opportunities where there's either a bit of a confusion or there are some gaps in services where they can step in and help out.
That's exactly right. And that's that networked approach where, you know, people who live in Mildura know their services much better than I ever will. And our Jobs Victoria person who will be up there will work in community with those providers and with job seekers and with the Commonwealth and with the Department of Education and Training to make it work on the ground.
Yep. Thank you. All right. I haven't seen any more hands up. We'll give people one last opportunity. Gone. All right. Lisa, thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate the support you've provided the network over the last 12 months. And more importantly, we look forward to working with you over the next couple of years on programs. Thanks for your time today. We will be able to share this presentation with everyone at the end of the week once we finish. Our next session is tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We've got Dr. Peter Scoogens talking about the Australian digital skills analysis work that we did with Microsoft. So Lisa, thanks for your time today. Thank you to all the delegates online, and we'll see you all tomorrow morning.
Thanks very much, Gary.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Lisa.